Robert Hayes was known across the city as a man who could close million-dollar deals with a calm smile. He lived in a mansion that many people only saw in glossy magazines. To outsiders, his life looked perfect: money, influence, luxury. But for Robert, that evening would remind him that wealth could not shield him from fear, nor could it replace the role of being a father. It was a late Friday afternoon when his driver pulled the sleek black car into the long driveway of his estate. Robert had just returned from a 3-day trip out of state where he was negotiating with investors. His assistant had begged him to stay one more day for another round of meetings, but something inside him told him he needed to go home. He thought it was exhaustion or perhaps a desire for rest in his own bed. He could not know that his decision would change everything. The mansion stood tall and beautiful, with shining windows and carefully trimmed hedges. Usually, the place buzzed with life: the chatter of maids, the footsteps of staff, the sound of television in the living room. But as Robert stepped out of the car and walked toward the main door, he noticed something odd. The air was unusually still. The front hall, though polished and bright, felt empty. He set down his suitcase and frowned. "Where is everyone?" he muttered to himself. He hung his coat on the rack and listened carefully. No greetings, no sound of movement. Just silence. The stillness unsettled him, but he tried to brush it off. Perhaps the staff had gathered in the kitchen. He took a few steps toward the marble staircase when suddenly a sound pierced the silence. A scream. It was high-pitched, desperate, and it came from upstairs. Robert froze. His heart slammed against his ribs. That was Emily's voice, his 9-year-old daughter. "Emily!" he shouted, his voice echoing through the empty halls. Without thinking, he ran. His polished shoes clattered on the stairs as he took them 2 at a time. The scream came again, this time louder, sharper. Robert's stomach twisted. 1,000 thoughts flashed in his mind in a second. Was she hurt? Was someone with her? Had something happened while he was away? By the time he reached the 2nd floor, his breath was heavy, but fear gave him speed. The sound led him straight to her bedroom. He grabbed the golden handle and pushed the door open with all his strength. The sight inside made his blood run cold. Emily was on the floor, half trapped under a large wooden bookshelf that had toppled over. Her small arms were pinned, and her face was wet with tears. She was screaming for help, her voice breaking in pain and fear. "Daddy!" she cried as soon as she saw him. For a moment, Robert's world spun. He was a man who had built empires, who had faced ruthless competitors in the boardroom without flinching. Yet in that instant, seeing his daughter helpless on the floor, his knees nearly buckled. His throat tightened, and he felt tears sting his eyes. But there was no time for shock. He rushed forward, dropped to his knees, and tried to lift the heavy bookshelf. His muscles strained. It was heavier than he imagined, filled with thick encyclopedias and novels Emily had collected with her tutor. His hands slipped against the polished wood, but he kept trying. "Hold on, baby, Daddy's here," he whispered, his voice trembling. Emily sobbed, "It hurts. Daddy, it hurts." The nanny burst into the room, her face pale with horror. "I only stepped away for a moment." "I'm so sorry, sir," she cried. "Call the doctor." Robert barked, his voice sharp with urgency. He gritted his teeth and tried again. With a desperate groan, he managed to tilt the bookshelf just enough to free her arm. Emily whimpered as he pulled her close into his arms. He checked her quickly. Her arm was bruised and swollen, but thank God, it was not broken. She clung to his shirt, crying into his chest. Robert stroked her hair, his own tears falling freely now. The mighty millionaire who could buy anything, who commanded respect wherever he went, was reduced to a trembling father, begging silently for his daughter to be safe. "It's okay, sweetheart. Daddy's here now. You're safe," he whispered over and over, as if the words themselves could heal her pain. Within minutes, the family doctor, who lived nearby, arrived with a kit. He examined Emily gently and confirmed it was a sprain, painful but not dangerous. Robert sat there holding Emily the whole time, refusing to let go. He barely heard the doctor's instructions or the nanny's apologies. His mind kept replaying the moment he opened the door, the sight of his daughter trapped, crying, helpless. The image burned into him like a scar. When the doctor left, Emily lay in bed, her arm bandaged and resting on a soft pillow. Robert sat at her side, still shaken. He watched her small chest rise and fall with each breath. The house around him seemed huge, empty, and meaningless. For years, he had worked day and night, telling himself he was building a legacy for her. He wanted to give her the best education, the finest home, the brightest future. But tonight, he saw the truth: none of it mattered if he wasn't there to protect her when she needed him. Emily turned her head and looked at him with sleepy eyes. She whispered, "Daddy. I thought you weren't coming back." The words pierced him deeper than anything else that night. He squeezed her hand gently, his voice breaking as he said, "I will always come back, Emily. I promise you. I'll never let you feel alone again." And as the night settled over the mansion, Robert Hayes, the man who had conquered markets and signed million-dollar contracts, sat quietly by his daughter's bedside, tears streaming down his face. For the first time in years, he understood that his greatest treasure wasn't in banks or boardrooms. It was lying right in front of him, holding his hand. Robert sat by Emily's bed long after the doctor had left. The room smelled faintly of medicine and lavender from the lamp on her nightstand. The once lively little girl now lay quiet, her arm carefully wrapped in a bandage. Her tears had dried, but Robert's own heart felt heavier than it ever had. He kept thinking, what if he had not come home early? What if her screams had gone unheard? The thought alone made him shiver. The nanny stood nervously at the door, wringing her hands. "Sir, I truly stepped away just for a moment. She wanted her favorite toy from the other room. When I came back, the bookshelf had fallen." Her eyes were filled with guilt. Robert glanced at her. His voice was softer now, but still firm. "Accidents happen. But she could have been killed." His eyes returned to Emily, who was clutching his hand tightly even in sleep. The nanny whispered, "I'm so sorry." She left the room quietly, leaving Robert alone with his daughter. Robert leaned back in the chair. His mind was racing. He remembered the feeling of the heavy bookshelf against his hands, the sound of Emily's screams echoing in his ears. For a man who had always been in control, who solved problems with money or influence, this helplessness was new and terrifying. He looked around Emily's room. The shelves were filled with books, dolls, framed pictures of her school drawings, and stuffed animals. She loved reading, and he had bought her every book she ever pointed at in a store. But tonight, those very books nearly crushed her. The thought cut him deeply. He realized that providing things wasn't enough. He had given her gifts, toys, clothes, but he had not given her what mattered most: his presence. A soft groan came from Emily as she shifted slightly. Robert immediately leaned forward. "I'm here, sweetheart," he whispered. Her small fingers curled tighter around his. At that moment, Robert understood something he had never wanted to admit. His wealth had made him careless. He had believed money could solve everything: hire the best nanny, build the safest home, buy the most advanced security. Yet none of it could prevent tonight. Only a father's eyes, a father's arms, could have protected Emily sooner. The night dragged on slowly. Robert refused to leave her side. Around midnight, the doctor returned to check on her again. He explained gently, "She'll be fine, Mr. Hayes. A sprain like this will heal in a few weeks. But she's shaken. What she needs most right now is comfort. She needs to know you're here." Robert nodded silently, though the words struck him like a lesson. Comfort. Presence. Not money, not expensive gifts. Just him. After the doctor left, Robert thought about his business trip. If he had followed his assistant's advice, he would be in another city tonight, sleeping in a hotel suite, preparing for another meeting. Emily would have been alone with her pain. He felt a wave of shame rise inside him. How many times had he chosen the company over her? How many times had he missed bedtime stories, school plays, or even simple dinners because he thought business mattered more? Around 2 a.m., Emily stirred again and whispered, "Daddy." Robert leaned close. "Yes, baby, I'm right here." Her eyes were half open, shining with tears. "I was so scared. I thought you weren't coming back." Robert's throat tightened. He kissed her forehead and whispered, "I will always come back. Always. You're my whole world." She gave a faint smile and closed her eyes again, falling back into sleep. Robert sat there in the quiet room, but he could not rest. The memory of her words kept echoing, "I thought you weren't coming back." It broke him. His wealth, his empire, his reputation, all of it meant nothing if his daughter doubted his love. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains. The staff moved quietly around the house, whispering about the incident. Robert barely noticed them. He stayed with Emily, feeding her breakfast himself and helping her sit up comfortably. She giggled weakly when he spilled a little juice on the tray, and for the first time in hours, Robert laughed too. The nanny entered again, still nervous. "Sir, I've arranged for extra safety checks in her room. We'll secure all the shelves and furniture." Robert shook his head. "Thank you. But from now on, I'll do the checks myself. I want to make sure my daughter is safe. No one else can carry that responsibility." His tone was calm, but it carried the weight of a promise. Later that day, Robert sat in his study, staring at his phone. Dozens of messages from business partners and his assistant lit up the screen. Meetings postponed, contracts waiting, investors demanding updates. Normally, he would have rushed to call back. But today, he turned the phone face down and leaned back in his chair. His mind was somewhere else entirely, on the frightened face of his daughter, on her trembling voice saying she thought he wouldn't come back. For the first time in years, Robert considered stepping back from his empire. The idea shocked him, but it also brought a strange peace. What good was power if it cost him his daughter's trust? That evening, Emily asked him to read her favorite storybook. He hadn't read to her in months. Usually the nanny or the tutor handled it. But as he opened the book and began to read, Emily leaned against him with a sigh of contentment. Her little arm rested in a sling, but her smile was warm. Halfway through the story, she looked up at him and whispered, "I'm glad you're here, Daddy." Robert's voice cracked, but he continued reading, each word carrying a weight he had never felt before. It wasn't just a story, it was a promise. A promise that he would no longer let money steal away his time with her. That night, after Emily fell asleep, Robert sat by the window of her room, watching the stars. He realized how close he had come to losing her. The thought made him shiver again. He had always believed that being a provider was enough, but tonight he understood something new. Being a father wasn't about money, it was about presence. It was about holding her hand when she was scared, about being there when she whispered in the dark. His tears fell silently as he whispered to himself, "Never again. I will never let her feel alone again." The next few days passed slowly in the Hayes mansion. Robert stayed by Emily's side as much as he could. His phone continued to buzz with calls from his assistant, but he often silenced it. For the first time in years, his business no longer felt like the center of his world. Everything now revolved around Emily. Every morning, he would bring her breakfast on a tray, carefully balanced with juice, toast, and fruit. It was a clumsy attempt. Sometimes the juice spilled, sometimes the toast was too dark, but Emily would smile anyway and say, "Thank you, Daddy." Those words warmed his heart more than any successful deal ever had. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky orange, Robert sat beside Emily on her bed. Her injured arm rested in a sling, but she seemed calmer now. She traced her small fingers over his hand and whispered, "Daddy, I was so scared that day." Robert's chest tightened. "I know, sweetheart. I was scared too." She looked up at him with teary eyes and said, "I thought you weren't coming back. You're always gone. I thought maybe you forgot about me." The words struck Robert like a blade. His throat grew dry, and he had to swallow hard before speaking. "Forgot about you? Never, Emily. You are the reason I work so hard. I wanted to give you everything: the best clothes, the best toys, the best future." Emily shook her head gently. "I don't want toys, Daddy. I just want you." Her words shattered something inside him. Robert felt his chest ache in a way he had never known. For years, he had convinced himself that being a good father meant being a good provider. He had believed money was enough. But here, in the quiet of his daughter's room, he realized he had been wrong. Tears filled his eyes. He pulled Emily close and held her carefully so as not to hurt her arm. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I should have been here more. From now on, I promise I'll be here. I'll spend time with you. You'll never have to wonder if Daddy will come back." Emily's face brightened with a small smile. She rested her head against his chest, and for a moment, the mansion that once felt like a cold palace now felt like a home. That night, after Emily had fallen asleep, Robert walked quietly into his study. He turned on the lamp and sat heavily in his leather chair. The desk was piled with files, contracts, and reports. His phone lit up with new emails. For years, this room had been his command center, the place where he built his empire. But now it felt empty. His daughter's words echoed in his mind, "I just want you." He leaned back and stared at the ceiling. Memories flooded his mind: birthdays missed, dinners eaten alone by Emily, the times she had begged him to attend her school plays, and he had sent flowers instead. The guilt weighed on him like iron chains. The next morning, Robert surprised the staff by cancelling his usual schedule. He told his assistant he would not be attending meetings that week. His assistant protested, warning him about falling shares and angry investors, but Robert's voice was firm: "Family comes first." It was the first time he had ever said those words aloud in his professional life. With the extra time, Robert focused on Emily. He took her out to the garden in her wheelchair so she could feel the sun and watch the butterflies. He read to her, told her stories from his own childhood, and even played board games with her. Emily laughed more that week than she had in months. Her joy filled Robert's heart with a warmth he had never felt in any boardroom. But the outside world was not quiet. News began to spread that Robert Hayes, the powerful businessman, was neglecting his company. Articles appeared in financial magazines. Some praised him for prioritizing family, others criticized him for weakness. His board of directors grew restless. They wanted their leader back, not a father sitting by his daughter's side. One evening, after Emily had gone to sleep, Robert's phone rang. It was the chairman of the board. His voice was sharp: "Robert, you need to get back to work. The company is suffering. Investors are panicking. If you don't return, we'll be forced to take drastic steps." Robert listened silently, his jaw tight. He looked at the closed door to Emily's room. He thought about her frightened words, her tiny voice saying, "I thought you weren't coming back." "Do what you have to do," Robert finally said. "My daughter needs me." He ended the call before the chairman could respond. The decision was not easy. Robert had spent decades building his empire. But in just a few days with Emily, he realized that no empire was greater than being her father. The next morning, Emily asked him softly, "Daddy, will you stay with me even after I'm better?" Robert knelt beside her and looked into her eyes. "Yes, Emily. I'll be here. Not just now, but always." Her face lit up with a pure smile, and she whispered, "That's all I want." In that moment, Robert knew his life had changed forever. The screams that had once filled the mansion had opened his eyes. He had broken down not out of weakness, but out of love. And from that love came a new strength, the strength to choose his daughter over everything else. The following week tested Robert Hayes more than any business battle he had ever faced. He had promised Emily that he would stay with her, and every day he worked hard to keep that promise. He woke her up in the mornings, helped her dress, and sometimes even prepared her breakfast with his own clumsy hands. The staff often stood silently, shocked to see their employer, the famous millionaire, doing simple fatherly chores that once seemed far beneath his busy schedule. But Robert didn't care what anyone thought. Each moment with Emily felt like a treasure. When she laughed, he felt his heart heal. When she held his hand, he felt stronger than he ever had at a board meeting. Yet outside the walls of the mansion, storms were gathering. His company was struggling without him. Investors were losing patience, shares were dropping, and newspapers were publishing headlines about his mysterious absence. To the world, Robert Hayes was expected to be a leader who never stepped away. To his daughter, he was expected to be a father who never left again. And now those two roles were pulling him in opposite directions. One morning, Robert sat with Emily in the garden. She was practicing drawing with her good hand, sketching butterflies she saw fluttering around the flowers. Robert leaned back in his chair, enjoying the warm sunlight. For the first time in years, he felt peace. Then his phone rang. He sighed, pulled it from his pocket, and saw his assistant's name. He answered reluctantly. "Sir, this can't go on," the assistant said quickly. "The board is furious. Our partners in Europe are threatening to pull out. The chairman wants an emergency meeting. If you don't come back soon, they'll move without you." Robert rubbed his forehead. His eyes went to Emily, who was smiling at her sketch. He lowered his voice. "I can't leave her right now. She needs me." "Sir, forgive me," the assistant replied, "but if the company collapses, won't she suffer too? Your empire is her future." Robert hung up without answering. The words echoed in his mind all day. Was his empire really her future? Or was her future the time and love she needed from him now? That evening, after Emily had gone to bed, Robert sat in his study. He stared at the portraits on the wall, his father's stern face, the first office building he ever bought, the company's logo framed in gold. All symbols of success. Yet they felt meaningless compared to Emily's small voice telling him, "I just want you." The next day, Robert attended the emergency board meeting. It was the first time he had left the mansion in days. As he entered the tall glass office tower that bore his company's name, he felt the weight of expectation pressing down on him. Executives in suits looked at him with a mixture of relief and anger. Inside the boardroom, the air was tense. The chairman stood up immediately. "Robert, this absence of yours has caused chaos. Clients are nervous. Our competitors are circling like sharks. You need to come back full-time." Another board member added sharply, "We understand you're dealing with family matters. But the company cannot afford a distracted leader. Either you return, or we will be forced to make changes." Robert sat silently, his fingers interlocked. He could hear Emily's voice in his heart, whispering, "I thought you weren't coming back." He closed his eyes briefly, then spoke with calm but firm resolve. "I will not abandon my daughter," he said. "She needs me. I will not let her grow up believing money matters more than she does." Gasps filled the room. The chairman's face turned red. "Robert, think carefully. This company is your life's work." Robert shook his head. "No. My daughter is my life's work. Everything else can be rebuilt. But if I lose her trust, if I lose her love, I can never rebuild that." The board erupted in arguments. Some shouted about responsibility, others about profit margins. Robert listened for a while, then rose from his chair. "I will not sacrifice my family for wealth. Do what you must, gentlemen. My choice is made." With that, he left the boardroom. Back at the mansion, Emily was waiting for him with her drawing in hand. "Look, Daddy," she said excitedly. She had drawn a picture of a man holding a little girl's hand, standing in a garden full of butterflies. Robert knelt down, tears welling in his eyes. "It's beautiful, Emily." She hugged him with her good arm. "That's us," she whispered. In that moment, Robert knew he had chosen correctly. The world could call him weak, the board could call him irresponsible, but Emily would call him something no title could replace: Dad. Yet deep inside, Robert knew this was only the beginning of the battle. The company would not wait forever, and he would soon be forced to make a final choice that would change everything. The days after the board meeting felt heavy, yet strangely freeing for Robert Hayes. He had walked away from the skyscraper boardroom, leaving behind the shouting executives and their angry demands. For years, that office had been his battlefield, the place where he fought for numbers, contracts, and profit. Now, for the first time, he realized he no longer cared. At the mansion, Emily was waiting with her gentle smile. She was still healing, but her laughter was returning. Whenever Robert entered her room, her eyes lit up as if he were the greatest hero in the world. That simple look gave him more satisfaction than any investor handshake ever had. But the outside world wasn't quiet. Newspapers ran headlines: "Hayes' empire in trouble." Some articles praised Robert for choosing his daughter. Others accused him of weakness, predicting the downfall of his fortune. Friends called to advise him, some begging him to return, others warning him that he would regret this decision for the rest of his life. One evening, Robert sat by the fire in the living room. The mansion was calm. Emily was asleep upstairs. He stared into the flames, thinking about everything he had built. His empire stretched across cities: real estate, hotels, investments. But what good was it, he thought, if his daughter believed she was not more important than a board meeting? His phone buzzed again. This time it was the chairman himself. Robert answered, his voice calm. "Robert," the chairman began coldly, "you've left us no choice. If you don't return tomorrow, the board will vote to replace you. You'll lose control." Robert looked at the fire, then closed his eyes. He felt no fear. "Do what you must," he replied softly. "I've already made my choice." He ended the call and placed the phone on the table. The next morning, Robert dressed in a simple shirt instead of his usual tailored suit. He walked into Emily's room with breakfast. She grinned when she saw him. "Daddy, are you staying today too?" Robert kissed her forehead. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm staying every day now." Later that week, news broke: Robert Hayes had stepped down as CEO of his empire. The media called it shocking, investors called it reckless, but Robert called it freedom. He issued a short statement: "No business is greater than family. I have chosen to be a father first." The world gasped. Some admired his courage, others mocked his decision. But inside the Hayes mansion, Emily smiled brighter than ever. To her, none of the headlines mattered. She finally had her dad back. In the weeks that followed, Robert's life changed completely. He drove Emily to school himself, waiting in the car just to see her wave goodbye. He attended her art shows, clapping the loudest even if her drawings were messy. He cooked dinners, sometimes burning the food, but laughing with Emily as they ate anyway. The mansion, once silent and cold, was now filled with laughter and warmth. Of course, there were challenges. Robert had lived as a businessman for so long that he struggled with simple tasks. He didn't know how to braid hair or bake cookies properly, but Emily didn't mind. She cheered for his clumsy efforts, and together they learned. One night, as Robert tucked her into bed, Emily whispered, "Daddy, you're different now." Robert smiled. "How so?" "You used to be gone all the time. But now you're my best friend." Her words filled his heart to the brim. He kissed her cheek and whispered, "And you are my greatest treasure." Months passed, and the Hayes empire survived under new leadership. Robert was no longer the face of the company, but he didn't care. He had traded boardrooms for bedtime stories, and profit reports for art lessons. Slowly, he discovered a happiness that money had never given him. Sometimes, he still felt the sting of judgment from outsiders. Old colleagues called him foolish. Former rivals laughed, saying he had thrown away power. But Robert never doubted his decision. Every time Emily held his hand, every time she ran to hug him after school, he knew he had chosen the right path. One afternoon, while walking with Emily in the park, she asked him, "Daddy, when I grow up, will I be rich like you?" Robert stopped and looked into her curious eyes. He knelt down and said, "Emily, being rich isn't about money. Being rich is about love, about family, about knowing what really matters. If you have those things, you'll be the richest person in the world." She thought for a moment, then smiled. "Then I'm already rich. Because I have you." Robert hugged her tightly, tears welling in his eyes. In that instant, he realized the truth: he hadn't lost anything, he had gained everything. Years later, people would still tell the story of Robert Hayes, the millionaire who walked away from his empire to be a father. Some called it madness. But those who understood life deeply called it wisdom. Robert himself never cared about the opinions. For him, the lesson was simple and eternal: money can build walls, but love builds a home. That night, as Emily drifted to sleep, Robert sat by her side, watching her breathe softly. The mansion was quiet, but it no longer felt empty. It was full of warmth, full of love, full of meaning. For the first time in decades, Robert Hayes felt truly rich. Not in the way the world measured wealth, but in the way that mattered most: in the laughter of his daughter, in the joy of her smile, and in the simple truth that he had finally become the father she had always needed.